All right, we thought about the different programs, the different information that was presented, and one of the other questions is, I wanted to know, and that's why I included it on the map about the number of schools and universities had a degree specific to substance abuse counseling. We found that there are programs within there are certificates that you can get that are within the Masters of Mental Health Counseling and the Masters of Social Work. And then I asked you earlier how many people graduated from the schools that were representing, and can you share your experience with stages of change during your time that were in those lessons? I was asking Lane the same question. How much do you remember about the stages of change being brought up? I shared earlier that you didn't even see that in so it's just interesting that mental illness is common in the US. 1 in 5 US adults live with mental illness, and we can also consider how many individuals are living with substance use disorders. You can go to the next slide. I appreciate you. All right. So we had some background information provided to better understand whether individuals have any experiences with stages of change. The next thing is the theories of addiction, the elements of substance abuse treatment, and demonstrate the belief of the therapist will affect the clients. And if you want to, you can put in the chat, what theory do you ascribe to? But even before we mention any of the theories, what theory do you ascribe to as far as addiction? What do you believe about addiction? What do you believe? Is there several theories that are used. The mechanisms of substance use disorder involves cognitive, emotional, physiological processes. And this creates a challenge. I think let's go to the next slide and let's see what it says as far as the theories of addiction. So another challenge of change is the manner in which behavior is defined as addictive, which in this case is defined as such when it meets two conditions, the strength of its reinforcement and failure to regulate, which failures to be regulated, which prevents the achievement of the person or society's goals. There has been a definition that has been used. It's saying that substance use disorder is a complex condition in which there is uncontrolled use of a substance despite harmful consequences. There's another one that says that people with a substance use disorder, they have distorted thinking and behaviors. There's changes in the brain. I'm getting ahead of myself is what I'm doing. Next slide. Because one of the theories includes the biological. So a biological predisposition, the neurotransmitter, the brain dysfunction. There's some people that believe that substance use disorder is because of the brain structure and how it's altered when you use with the neurotransmitter. The brain imaging study shows that changes in the areas of the brain that relate to judgment, decision making, learning, memory, behavior control. So some people believe it's strictly from that. Next slide. Then you have some individuals believe the theories that addiction is a symptom of underlying psychological problems. This is more of Freud's idea with the whole iceberg and believing that there must be something underlying from childhood that when addressed, addiction will remit. The next slide. Some people believe that abusing is immoral. It's a choice that stems from sin and sinful character. We can go to the next slide. Some people believe that it is a result of environmental, social learning, which includes emotions such as stress, coping, and social influences, peer pressure. You hear that all the time. Next. And as I said earlier, this presentation considers the stages of change, and this theory, although some of the earlier, the biological, but this theory, it combines all of them. And no question there, it's actually a trinity. So we're looking at things such as mental health, emotional health, beliefs and expectations, included with biological, which is your age, your gender, your genetics, your physiologic reactions, tissue health, and then it also includes the sociological, which is interpersonal relationships, social support, socioeconomic. So I consider utilizing stages of change and biopsychosocial as a way to treat the whole person. What's the next slide say? What does the DSM-5 say? What does it say about the substance use disorders? You can flip slides there. If you have your DSM-5, you can pull it up, but this is what the DSM-5 says as far as what substance use disorders are. But even with that, that creates its own sets of challenges. You can go to the next slide after that one. Next one. With each challenge, the success of the client is dependent upon the ability to establish the therapeutic relationship. If you believe that the theory of addiction that is moral, then you're going to come into place that you're dispossessed. If you believe that is strictly from the brain, then you're going to want to do whatever you need to do in order to alter the brain medication and things like that. If you believe that it is one of the earlier ones, such as environmental social learning, you would encourage the individual, you would believe that that person just needs to change their location. So in the first session, when you're asking the question, you're going to give the idea of what you believe about that client and their change based on how you're coming about, how you're coming at them about what you believe about addiction. So when you get those, ask those questions, you're counting the number of symptoms. You may be actually imposing a value onto them and instead of them doing a reflective look, you may actually be telling them this is what you believe. And so I have a discussion. I don't know if I want to open the door to that kind of a discussion. Although it would, if you're coming from a place of social work, there's a belief about addiction. You're coming from a place of mental health counseling, there is as well. And depending on whoever your instructor is in the, I think 13 different universities, that's gonna, whatever they highlight in the 4 classes, as far as substance use disorder goes, it's gonna be what you're gonna believe about that theory. So if you have a professor or individual who is presenting one of the 4 sessions and they're coming from a place of social work, that's where their research is going to be. That's where their theoretical orientation is going to be. So the next slide. Next slide, sweetie. Yeah, I didn't want that one anymore. Are you doing it with your hands? He confused me. I'm blaming him for confusing me. Go back. I didn't know. I was like, oh, I didn't look. So challenge of change stems from the manner in which behavior is defined as addictive. So that is a repeat. So that's why I was like, just go ahead. It's getting late in the day. Next one. And for you all in group, it's getting late in the day too, because they were in class from 2 and it's a 2 hour and 40 minutes. And they tell me that you didn't get a break. So I'm just like, if you, did you take a break? Are you taking breaks? Are you like quietly walking out and walking back in, wondering where we are? Maybe that's another reason why I'm recording it this way. So then it's like, did I miss anything? You probably didn't. Challenge number 6, it says, the challenge presents when understanding behavior change focuses on the difference between the individual's motivation, their perspective regarding their motivation, and the maintenance of their newly adopted behaviors. That's cool. You can stay there. I like the National Institute on Drug Abuse because it also has 13 elements of drug treatment. 13 elements of drug treatment, and I liked it because it continues to give a framework. Number 1 is addiction is a complex treatable disease that affects brain function and behavior. And if you look in the box, it was a neat picture there. It has treatment, the dangers, problems, obsessed, dependence, overdose, and craving. So if you have an individual that you believe that has symptoms of addiction, You recognize it as a complex, treatable disease that affects brain function and behavior. And if you're working with them as far as understanding the stages of change, then you could give, if they don't believe that it's an issue, we can begin to ask questions to move them from pre-contemplation to contemplation. If you blacked out, let's say they blacked out as a DWI, a blackout is a brain function, it's a brain disorder. And you can say, you blacked out. Here's maybe, go to the doctor, let the doctor know you blacked out. Why did you black out? Was it because you were mixing medicine, or what were you doing? And if they're mixing medicine, you can highlight that as a symptom of addiction, and began to move them from not thinking that it's an issue to thinking it's an issue. So the next slide for me. Thank you. No single treatment is appropriate for everyone. Some individual, I was telling you about my experience at Work Release and Restitution Center, which is really where it solidified me as far as patterns go. You had individuals that were in work release. We were supposed to help them with their goals and their situations, and that's why a lot of the different theories were applied. But what if you have an individual that say had an IEP plan while they were in school? And I realized later that the IEP plan doesn't move to college with them unless they tell them, and it doesn't move with them to their job situation unless they tell them. And they began to have vocational issues, things on the job, focus, and stressful situations, and being argumentative and things like that, with the where it may be that they were having issues when they were in school, and it's now just transferred to later, and then they go home and they're stressed or overwhelmed, and they begin to consume. And so some of the treatment may need to acknowledge, like, where are they in the belief about their issues, and did their issues just begin as far as vocational services go, or did their issues happen earlier? So the National Institute on Drug Abuse suggests that no treatment is appropriate. You can apply the use of the biopsychosocial to examine some of those other issues, and you can apply the stages of change in order to assist them with maybe what areas that they can easily manage, and then the ones that may be a little bit harder that require more time. Next. And this is, it says treatment needs to be readily available. So on top of the vocational services, when we get to the effectiveness of community involvement, this creates a list of, if you have individuals that you're seeing with addiction or drug abuse or drug substance use disorders, being familiar with vocational services, having a contact at Goodwill, having a contact with a couple of therapists, having a contact with some doctors and places they go, especially if they don't have the resources, or if they don't have the finances to go, contact with educational services. If they might have literacy issues, but then they might be employed full time, so they can't go to a traditional what do you call them, a traditional education or community college. If they've had situations, and again, stages of change, because what if they're thinking about, what, I need to go to a doctor and check on my health. And then they reach out to you and say, I'm interested in doing that. And you tell them, well, part of your plan is Google. Well, just in the lesson alone, we've already realized what happens when we Google information. It's not there, and then at that point, that may becomes more defeated, and they're not able to, so stages of change are there. Same thing with housing, transportation. So the treatment needs to be readily available, and you can assist in that by helping, to facilitate some of that. The next slide. And it says the effective treatment attends to the multiple needs of the individual. Stages of change also is useful because they may be pre-contemplation in their drug use, but they may be planning in their need for a budget and so forth. So with that one individual, just being aware of having the multiple needs of the person. And then there's 11 indicators. And like I said, I thought that these graphics, they involve lists. Next slide, thanks. Remaining in treatment for an adequate period of time is critical. Here are the levels of care. The levels of care are based upon the diagnosis, and then you have the ASAM criteria, and there's different trainings as far as that goes. Remaining in treatment. Sometimes when a person comes in for individual counseling, we've experienced this, right? They may not be appropriate for individual therapy. They may not even be appropriate for virtual um, therapy. And we realize that in the time of COVID, some people cannot just do online therapy. And so, and you want them, how long do you want them to remain there? Well, if you apply the stages of change concept, what if they're just in a planning and maybe the plan is 6 months later, 3 months later, tapering them down, them going from detox to intensive outpatient, trying that doesn't work. Detox to residential to aftercare, back to intensive outpatient treatment. So making sure that wherever the person is, as far as their plan and what they believe that they need assistance with, would be helpful. Counseling, the next slide has counseling. And it has on there, you can see highlighted stages of change model, trans theoretical model. Next to it is the health behavior model. Next to it is the theory of planned behavior and behavioral economics. And so individual and or group and other behavioral therapies are common forms of drug treatment. So National Institute of Health is saying that these are helpful as well for helping to treat individuals. Behavioral therapies. Next slide. Medications are important. And you combine these with behavioral therapies, the behavior of taking your medication on a regular basis. Some people don't like it, don't want to, don't notice a change. So, taking action, an action step for them is, I took my medication today. It can be, I took it every day at the same time a day. So that's another element of drug treatment. The next one, you can include on the individual treatment and services plan. It must be assessed continually and modified as necessary. That's another, where are they along the way? Have they reverted back to pre-contemplations, or have they made their way to maintenance? Where are they exactly? Next slide. Many drug addicted individuals also have other mental disorders. And some people who have been in the field a while may say, really, Melissa, you have to remind us of that. I have to remind myself of that, because they may have been learned, that may be learned behavior, the coping with the stress with alcohol. That may be a learned behavior, when the reality of it is they may have anxiety, they may have panic, they may have depression, and it's just manifesting. They may be, we had a conversation about the stages of change and talking about, what was happening in the 80s. It was one of the conversations in group. The DSM-1 was 1956, DSM-2 was 1970 to 1980s, DSM-3 happened in the 80s. So, and then DSM-4, I'm going to say 1996 or 1998, and then DSM-5 is where we are now. So it went from the very first DSM, and the definitions of substance use disorder. I mean, at least when I was at detox, in Mecklenburg County Detoxification Facility, the substance use disorder was not called that. You actually had you were either there was a legal aspect on the substance use disorder. And so, for everybody that got arrested, right, with a DWI, that was a criteria. So we legitimately would never do crime for life with any of them because they had a symptom of whatever the disorder was, because there was a legal aspect. They removed that between 3 and 4, I believe, or even between 4 and 5. They took the legal aspect out of it. Somebody wants to write that down. I think while I'm in training with other professionals, and I would be like, wonder why they changed the legal when they were combating the laws, and they had the diagnosis that had the legal aspect, then you remove the legal. Why did they do that? What happened in those 30 years that they decided that they wanted to remove the legal aspect? Someone can write that down. I'm not opening it up to a discussion. That's just a thought point, because stages of change. If you had someone that was being in treatment in the 70s or in the 80s or even in the 90s, it's going to dramatically look different now. If you had someone who was a professional in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, that's going to also look different than now, as well. Next one. Medically assisted detoxification is only first stage of addiction treatment, and by itself does little to change long-term drug use. And we know what that means because it says that, and I think you said it one time, Lane, that it takes about 2 or 3 years for the brain to heal from drug use. So, bringing somebody back to zero is going to take a couple of years out, depending on the length of time that, and sharing that with them, as far as stages of change go, how are they going to be, how is that going to set in their frame or their value, as far as them thinking, oh, I'm going to have to, and depending on what you believe about the theory of addiction and your concept of change is what you think is addictive, do you believe that about the drug use? So that's going to be two ideas that's going to need to be questioned. Next slide. Treatment does not need to be voluntary to be effective. Involuntary can be somebody coming in and they're saying, well, no, I don't think, I'm not a harm to myself or someone else. But then if you have them, that's an involuntary client. But if you have them, then you can encourage them and say, maybe not, but it's not okay that, you're drinking a 24-pack every day. That's very harmful. Here's why. Here's some information to show you how harmful that is. Next one. And drug use during treatment must be monitored continuously, as lapses during treatment do occur. And we all in agreement of that. Next one. Treatment programs should assess patients for health problems as well as provide risk reduction counseling or to help modify or change behavior. So again, this is the challenge of change. Next slide. That was a lot, Melissa. I know. And it was very, very substance abuse heavy. So next slide. I thought that was neat because it has a lot of words on there. Depression's on there, health's on there, therapy's on there. I forgot what you call that, but since I am, substance use is my background, I want to keep reminding us of that. And if we're working with substance abuse clients, substance use disorder clients, then here's some ideas for behavioral changes. Next one. Symptoms of substance use disorder. So we show you what the DSM-5 says. Here is a snippet. Impaired control, which includes cravings and failed attempts. Social problems, which includes failure to fulfill major tasks. Risky use, which is risky settings, and drug effects. So these can all be behavioral categories, or it can show you behavioral categories. So we're going to go to the next stage. Keep asking questions. Theories of behavior change. You can, guys, yeah, right there. So it says there have been studies that have set out to design assessment measures that help identify skills for therapeutically influencing clients. And in the chat, I've been said in the chat here lately, how have you measured the effects of the interventions used with clients and its effectiveness? When you do a slide, it reads like you talk. What? How have you measured the effects of the interventions used with clients and their effectiveness? How have you used, what interventions have you used? Put them in the chat. Maybe someone else has done that. Let's just take a couple minutes and have a conversation about that, because we're going to move into some of the theories of behavioral change, and why I don't like them and why I like the stages of change better. And then that will wrap us up. That will wrap us up. So what we got? Take a few minutes, just a few minutes, because I don't know how many more minutes that we have. And that will wrap. What interventions have you used to help influence clients to move in behavioral changes? Who has a hand up? Or does anyone have anything in the chat? And at this point, I'm looking at the moderator. Do you see anything in the chat? No. Nobody's chatting. Somebody chat. No, please. And if we were in a presentation, so what I normally do is when I walk in, I normally have candy and I pay people off. So once you give them candy, it's like now you're like paying them to participate. Virtual dramatically takes that whole thing away. I'll have pens though. You want a pen? I'm gonna do candy. You want a pen or you want some candy? All right, we're doing good. We're on the last stretch. We're on the last stretch. You can move on the last stretch. Theories of behavioral change. The theories of behavioral change range from how people become motivated to change behavior, which they form an intention, how they translate this motivation into behavior change, how they maintain newly adopted behaviors, and how they reduce the risk. And this is some that I found. And it says another challenge of change is when understanding behavior changes, we focus on the differences between individuals' motivation. You have behavioral change such as control theory or perceptual control theory, which is part of a feedback loop. Another challenge of change is control theory is rarely used to explicitly to develop interventions for addictive behavior. So it doesn't happen by itself. And then you have another challenge of change is, and I think I repeated myself, goal setting theory, which is developed to incorporate relationship between performance goals and subsequent performance. So let's see what these theories of behavior changes are. Let's look at the first one, which is the model of action. Says it was developed how different reference values influence behaviors. Well, let me see what we have here. So we have pre-decisional motivation. So we choose it. We intentional about what we're choosing. And then as we plan it, then there's an intention there. So there's intention formation. So I am going to stop eating candy. I'm going to plan to not buy candy, Lane. I'm not going to do it. And then St. Patrick's Day has green candy. So then what do? Do I go buy the candy or no? I try not to buy the candy. And then so volition, so you have two motivations. You have the pre-decisional and then you have the post-actional. So you have choosing, planning, acting, evaluating. But when you think about the stages of change, I'm sure that there's some pros and cons to that. How's it?